that's not fair for some people won't be able to afford it. But if you want to go, it should be interesting. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot about it. I know they're going to talk about a soldier that died on this date. He died in 1879. I don't know if they're going to try to raise his spirit. Like I said, I have no idea what they're doing. But it should be interesting, if nothing else. But Macbeth was very, very good. Do I need to leave the test on longer today than 5 o'clock for anybody? Yes? Okay. I will do that. I don't mind. Okay. Macbeth, the only thing about Macbeth, it doesn't start until 8 o'clock, and it ran over 2 hours. I don't want to say I'm an old person, but I'm an old person. Getting home at 11. I've always been like this. My mom said even when I was little, like 9 o'clock, they would look for me, and I'd already put myself to bed. I'm just not a late night person. If I'm home, I'm good. I'll stay up. But being out that late, I did it in my 20s, not so much anymore. So I got home at 11, had to get up at 5. And then I forgot everything this morning. I had to go back to the house. So I'm kind of a space cadet this morning. But we're going to start a new section, even if I am spacey. The early republic. This is what most historians refer to as that 1800 to 1820 period. Really, it kind of ends at the end of the War of 1812. And that's not turned on. You need to point it that way anyway. We've had a transfer of power politically, so it kind of marks a new era for the country. And these early 1800s, early 19th century is really a period of big growth, big change. Land sales west of the Appalachians were soaring. Between 1800 and 1820, the population is going to grow. The population west is going to grow from 300,000 to 2 million. And by 1840, 40% of all Americans are going to live west of the Appalachians, and there's going to be 8 new states. So you get a huge amount of growth in this first part of the 19th century. There's really 3 streams that flow west. Let me see if we can. Let's see if I can drag this over here. Maybe not. No, it's only big. It's the stupid. I'm sure the online people can't see this, and I'm gonna have to move it back because I'm gonna block the thing. But I need my notes. So Alabama, remember, the frontier is going to move in pieces. At this point, this is your frontier. We don't ever think of this as the frontier, but this is the frontier. So Alabama and Mississippi are going to have settlers that are going to flow from Maryland, Virginia, and the 2 Carolinas are going to come down here. Also, some from Georgia, but Georgia's kind of a wild little state, and they have enough room that they're not pushing out yet. Not too much anyway. they have a tendency to want to go south. They're trying to encroach on Florida. That's the whole. We will get to that story. Kentucky and Tennessee. Those people were mostly from Maryland and Virginia. West Virginia doesn't exist. Not going to have it until the Civil War. So this is all Virginia. Maryland is this little spot right here. Virginia is a huge state. It goes all the way down here. Upstate New York. So this area is starting to get settled. Upstate Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. These people are going to come out of the New England states. So those are your settlement patterns. Those are the kinds of people that are moving, or where the people come from that are moving west. I mean, they're all kinds of people, but so you're going to spread that New England enterprise type of an idea into those areas. You're going to take that planter mentality, agricultural ideas into Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and Kentucky. So it's going to set up those states for what they're going to be, is who comes into it. This was actually a good time, if there was a good time in American history for free blacks. This is a good time for free blacks. It's actually the fastest growing segment of the population at this point. You have movements at the time to free blacks in a lot of the northern states. You have African Americans that fought for the revolution, got their freedom that way. And so this is one of the faster growing segments. It's still not a large segment of the population, but it is part of the population. In 1790, 90% of Americans lived within household production. They lived on the land, and it's not subsistence farming, but it's like just a step above. You're making enough to live comfortably, your house and all the people in it. And that is changing rapidly. More and more small farmers are looking to put in surplus. If you have surplus, you can sell it. Either like what we call today farmers markets, or in regular marketplaces. The country is starting to change even more to regional markets. It's following those colonial patterns, where the South plants and the North does all the shipping and the merchants. But that's getting even more clearly defined. But at the same time, we're no longer a colonial country or a colonial place. And, under mercantilism, under the colonial system, the colonies provide the raw material and they're the market. We don't have to do that now. We can provide the raw materials, make the manufactured goods, and sell to other markets. Free enterprise can actually exist within the country. And that's freeing for a lot of people. And it does change our economy as people really start pushing forward. And Americans have been long known for their enterprise. And they get into business pretty quick. Jefferson, remember we got him elected. He will take the presidency. He gives his inaugural speech on March 4th, 1801. He is the first president in our new capital city of Washington, D.C. Close the doors so people in the hallway don't have to listen to me. At this point, remember, the capital is in D.C. because that's how they got the Southerners to accept some of the Hamiltonian ideas. So really, Washington is in a horrible spot. Washington is down here, which makes it vulnerable by sea attack. Later, when we have our Civil War, it's right on the border between the North and the South. It really would have been better off in Pennsylvania or New York, someplace more interior. But, you know, Southern pride, we had to win something. So we have the capital of the country. But when Jefferson gets there, the city's not even half built. They've started building the Capitol. They've started building the White House. They haven't even cleared the streets of stumps. I mean, they've laid out streets, but they're not actually all completely open yet. He walks from a boarding house to the Capitol, gives his inaugural speech. He stresses simplicity and conciliation. I will read the quote: "Equal and exact justice to all men," okay, put in parentheses, white men, "peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of person," again, white men, women, Indians, and African Americans don't count, "under the protection of habeas corpus and trial by juries impartially selected. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment." So Jefferson comes in with this tone of conciliation. Let's, make peace between the Republicans and the Federalists and get on with running the country. But of course, it's easy to do that when you win and you're going to have the chance to run the country the way you want it run. His inauguration set the style for his administration. He took pains to avoid pomp and circumstance. He was very careful with government money and very careful to avoid the image of excess, which he thought, smacked of monarchy. Now, this is not a man with cheap taste. But when it came to being president, that is the image he put forth. Not that he was cheap, but that he was frugal. He was the first president to actually act as a party leader. And despite his promise not to put Federalists out of office, he did. He put men of his party in policy-making positions. He kind of skirts the issue by not necessarily removing Federalists from government positions, but just getting rid of their positions. The effect is the same, but it's kind of the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. He picked for his Secretary of State, James Madison. Secretary of the Treasury was Albert Gallatin, who he was a Pennsylvania Republican that actually had won the respect of the Federalists. He had already served as Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Postmaster. No, take that back. He did not. I have my notes mixed up. He was a very good economic, and he was of the caliber of Hamilton but he didn't actually follow Hamilton's ideas. But he also wasn't ready to scrap them all either. And he had the ability to convince Jefferson that not all of, the national bank is not necessarily a bad idea just because you don't like big government. There's actually some benefits to this. So he's going to be very important. Jefferson did, well, I told you that. No, this is where I'm getting confused, sorry. He put men, Federalists, in control of the New England Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Postmaster. So he did have some Federalists in his cabinet. And to deal with that parting blow by the Hamiltonians passing the Judiciary Act of 1802, or 1800, Congress repeals it in 1802. 1801, 1802. Okay. I didn't sleep enough last night. I'm sorry. But by doing that, he gives John Marshall, yes, the opportunity, his first opportunity to strengthen the Supreme Court. When Congress repeals the Judiciary Act, remember the Judiciary Act of 1801 vastly expanded the judiciary. There were like 42 positions opened up just in Washington, D.C. alone. One of those positions was going to a man named Mayberry. He was a midnight appointee. Adams had signed his letter of commission, but it had not been delivered before he left office. Jefferson told Madison, the Secretary of State, who would have been the appropriate person to deliver this commission, hold on to it. Don't deliver it. We're getting ready to repeal that act. It doesn't matter. But it mattered, because Mayberry knew he was going to get the commission. And he sues for his letter. He wants to get his letter of commission and take the job. So the case goes to the Supreme Court. It's the first case that the Supreme Court is going to have a chance to rule on federal law, and it's going to be the first case that they rule a federal law unconstitutional. And this happens under Chief Justice John Marshall. And Marshall's going to hang around a while. He's got a lot of effect. He's going to be there until 1835. He rules that the Judiciary Act of 1789, the first one, which gave the court jurisdiction over mandamus proceedings. I am not a lawyer, but writ of mandamus is what Mayberry sued. That was what his suit was. So this act that gave the court jurisdiction over mandamus proceedings was unconstitutional because the Constitution specified that the court should have original jurisdiction in cases, only in cases involving foreign ambassadors or the states. So Marshall is ruling, and he is not the only Chief Justice. There are 6 of them, but he's the only Chief Justice, but there are 6 justices. He's ruling that the way that he can't even see this case, that the law is unconstitutional. He does this for a couple of reasons. One, he wants to set up the Supreme Court as a very strong branch of government. 2, they didn't want to come out and say, Jefferson, you have to deliver that letter, because then Jefferson's going to refuse, and it's going to set up a conflict that the Supreme Court could lose. But this stunning precedent says emphatically that it is the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. By ruling this way, he is saying the Supreme Court gets final say on any law that's passed, which confirms Jefferson's fear that the Supreme Court is going to be partisan, which is true and not true. They do push, I mean, this does expand the power of the Supreme Court, which translates into big government, which is where Jefferson says it's partisan. The Republicans do manage to get some of the most partisan judges out. One that they do is District Judge John Pickering, and basically he was insane and a drunk, which are not crimes in and of himself, except that he would go on drunken rants in the courtroom, and that is not, that is an impeachable offense. But Marshall pretty much establishes the foundation of American jurisprudence, starting with this case. And it establishes the authority of the Supreme Court and the constitutional supremacy of the national government over the states. Because he is saying, when he says that, he said the Constitution specifies that the court has original jurisdictions in cases involving foreign ambassadors and the states. So they're saying that the Supreme Court can rule on issues of the states. Domestically, Jefferson did not set out to dismantle Hamilton's economic program. Much of that was due to Galantine, who convinced him that a bank is not inherently a bad thing. A national bank can be a good thing. It gives you stable currency, which is a good thing. It gives you a central banking location for all of the government banking needs. This is a good need. They did disagree about federal debt, and Jefferson set out to reduce the debt. Part of this was getting rid of people's jobs, because if you get rid of their jobs, you don't pay them. That reduces debt. He pushed for a very frugal government. It was save money at every turn. He did repeal the whiskey tax, which made him a hero to the farmers. But that left income resting on the sale of Western lands and the tariffs. And Jefferson is not a fan of tariffs. But he doesn't, this is another area where Galantine steps in and tells him you can't really get rid of them. One, we need the income. Two, we have beginning manufacturing that need the protection, and you need the support of that manufacturing sector. The land of Western sales was going all right. Ohio was admitted as the 17th state in 1803. In the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars, which we are not a part of, but we benefit, well, we will benefit and then not benefit from it. In the beginning, we benefit because there's increased shipping. England, Napoleon just goes after everybody. He is going to rule the world, which is never a good idea. Nobody who has ever set out to rule the world has accomplished that. because it's too big. You get too stretched out and you can't manage all the little parts. And you would think people would, look at your history and see that, but it still happens. But early on in the Napoleonic Wars, we're doing better because the shipping's increased because the French are preoccupied with the war, the English are preoccupied with the war, other people are preoccupied with the war, and we're taking up the slack when it comes to shipping. One of the frugal acts that Jefferson embarks on is to reduce the Army and the Navy. And it has more of an effect on the Army than it does on the Navy. Jefferson is one of those old school, we don't need a standing army, we're fine. It's going to come back to bite us. In 1807, Jefferson pushed through an act that outlawed foreign slave trade as of January 1st, 1808. That was the earliest date available, according to the Constitution, because it is written into the Constitution that it can be made illegal in 1808. At this point, South Carolina was the only state still importing slaves. And it doesn't completely stop it. They're smuggling, but it does cut it back quite a bit. What it doesn't change is the internal slave trade. There's still slaves being sold, bought and sold within the states. I have this as a domestic issue, but it's really kind of more of a diplomatic issue. Around this time, we started having problems with pirates, which points out that you really can't get rid of the Navy. We need our Navy. So a little bit more money goes into the Navy, but not a lot. Jefferson still wants to cut back. But along the Barbary coast of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, Tunis, that area has always had piracy. And most people just either paid the bribes, didn't go there, ignored it, whatever. And the U.S. paid blackmail payments to Morocco in 1786, to others in the 1790s. Pretty much it was cheaper and easier just to pay them off, get our ships back, than to actually deal with the situation. But in 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli upped the demands. All of a sudden, he wants $300,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money today. That was really a lot of money in 1801. So Jefferson sends the Navy to blockade Tripoli. Tripoli is a trading port. You don't want to be blockaded. And they blockaded it until 1805. It just kind of drug on. And it was a boring war. Not a whole lot happened. In 1804, Lieutenant Stephen Decour slipped into the harbor and set fire to the Philadelphia, and that was probably the biggest event of the entire action. Finally, the Pasha settles for $60,000 ransom and releases the crew, because they had taken the crew of the Philadelphia off the ship and imprisoned them. They held them for more than a year. But $60,000 was a lot less than $300,000. So we paid them off and left. But we sort of proved that we can effectively act as a Navy. We did manage to blockade their port for 4 years. And Jefferson manages to deal effectively with that issue. The other diplomatic, these should be diplomatic and not domestic issues. The other issue is the Louisiana Purchase. And I will put an article and an extra credit test on the Louisiana Purchase on Blackboard when I remember, and it should be pretty soon. And yes, I know I didn't get the test open when I said I did. I said I would, but work went downhill really fast on Wednesday. The Louisiana Purchase is a boon for the United States. It's going to double, more than double, the size of the United States. It adds 875,000 acres, plus or minus. But it also causes some issues. So a little backstory. Napoleon took Louisiana from Spain in 1800. Remember, Spain held everything west of the Mississippi. So now we have the French back over there. We don't want the French as neighbors. Even Jefferson, who loves the French, doesn't really want Napoleon as a neighbor. So we send, or Jefferson sends, Robert Livingston to Paris to negotiate in 1801. The negotiations drag on. In 1803, Jefferson sends James Monroe to assist. Monroe gets to Paris, and right before he actually gets there and to meet up with Livingston, the French get a hold of Livingston and say, hey, you want to buy it? $15 million in Louisiana can be yours. Now, Louisiana is not just this funky little shoe-shaped thing down here. Louisiana is all of this orange. So we're not buying one little bitty state. We're buying a whole area. That whole area is Louisiana territory. What had happened is Napoleon had lost big in Haiti, and he was desperate for money. This area in the middle of this continent across the ocean is one of his least concerns. Yeah, it would be nice to hold it, but he has bigger problems. So let's sell it. And of course, Livingston says, sure, we'll buy it. Comes back to the, sends it back to the U.S. The Treaty of Cession is signed on April 30, 1803. But there's some problems. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the president can authorize buying property. Should Congress have acted on that? Should the president have acted on that? Should it have gone to our vote? These issues start up. Eventually, Jefferson is convinced by others that it falls under the presidential duties of treaties. That, yeah, get the Senate to ratify it, but it's okay. You can do it. But how can you not? How could you turn down this big area? This, like I said, this more than doubles the country. It is ratified on December 20, 1803. And we own all of this. Now, Spain still owns Florida and this one little spot of Louisiana. But pretty quickly after ratification, American settlers in Baton Rouge state, because we tend to spread into areas that are not ours. We'll get into that again with Texas. There's a lot of Americans in Mexican Texas. That's where we get our revolution. But there were Americans in Louisiana. They stage a rebellion in Baton Rouge, proclaim a republic, and that part's annexed pretty quickly too. Louisiana is going to become our 18th state, and when they do, they claim this area. This is the part that they rebelled and then they claimed, and these are actually the Florida parishes. They're still called the Florida parishes because they were part of Florida originally. By 1813, we've taken the rest of the Gulf Coast. So we take the parts of, okay, I've got it backwards. These are the Florida parishes. We take this part of Mississippi, we take this part of Alabama. They still have the panhandle, but we're getting more and more of the Gulf Coast. And we'll get Florida too. It's just going to take another war and a very impotent general to get to that part. So now we have this huge area. Jefferson had, in his private life, been an amateur scientist, and he was very, very interested in leading or learning about this new region. And in 1804, he asked Congress to finance a mapping and scientific expedition to the far northwest. This is actually what the article is about. It's Lewis and Clark. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark are chosen to command this expedition. They call it the Corps of Discovery, set out with nearly 50 members from St. Louis. And their mission is to learn as much about this new area that we've added as possible. And they were scientists as well. They left out kept detailed journeys. They dealt well with the Indians they met. They're a small force. They were lucky in a lot of respects where they ran into Indians that were actually friendly. Their first winter went well. They wintered at what they named Fort Mandan in South Dakota. They built a little fort there. Following that winter, they sent back scientific journals. They sent back samples, including a live prairie dog and a magpie, things that had not been seen in the eastern part of the country. It is after this winter that they meet Sacagawea, the Shoshone woman who is famous enough that she's actually on one of our American coins, and helped them to get through the rest of their journey. Her story is actually very interesting. That's one of those things that's fun to look up. She was actually, they didn't take her from her tribe. She had been a captive in another tribe. And in their journeys, they will go back to her tribal area, and she'll actually meet back up with her brother. It's kind of cool. Their next winter was in Astoria, Oregon, which, if you will look at that map, is not in the orange area. It's not part of the Louisiana Purchase, so they went off the reservation as well. But that gives us claim to Oregon by right of discovery and exploration. They come back, and it's going to take almost 10 years for a full accounting of their journal, their journey to get published, but bits and pieces get out. Maps, some journals, but definitely word that there is a lot of fur trade possible in this area. There's a lot of animals. There's prairies where you can plant things because grass grows, and where grass grows, wheat will grow. And people get very, very interested in getting into this new part of the country. But we will get to the settlement part later. Politically, there's some fallout from the Louisiana Purchase. Like I said, there were some constitutional questions. And there's some realignment issues. The South and West were thoroughly behind this new acquisition. More area that we can trade, we can spread out in. More area that we can expand slavery into, that we can grow cotton in. You know, it's contiguous with the frontier, which is the West at this point. Those people were always willing to move even further west. So you get the South and the West solidly behind Jefferson. But New England was not as excited about that. New England could see their influence shrinking as, you know, New England's not going to get any bigger. It's landlocked at this point. You're not going to get any more New England states. You can get a lot more Western states, which means the West is going to have more influence in the Senate. The South, if it keeps spreading across, it's going to have more influence in the Senate. And New England sees that as a threat. But Jefferson is very well liked, and even some in New England are starting to shift towards his Republican ideas, including John Quincy Adams, who was the son of John Adams, who was solidly, well, not solidly, he was a Federalist, but he was more midline. But this is causing panic among the Federalists. And you start getting some desperate people doing desperate things, and one of those is Aaron Burr. He is looking at the election of 1804 and trying to figure out how he can influence it to get the Republicans out of power. Like I said, Jefferson's very popular. It's not going to be an easy thing. And there's a lot of ugly things being said. And Hamilton makes a comment that Burr is a dangerous man and should not, something along the line, I didn't write down, so I'm paraphrasing it, that Burr was a dangerous man and should not be allowed in office. Well, that is what causes the Aaron Burr-Alexander Hamilton duel. Hamilton, okay, so y'all understand what dueling is, right? Two people with guns go out and stand and look at each other and shoot. Stupid. That's almost as bad as the two armies standing. It's kind of the same concept. And it all predicates on honor. Hamilton had no desire to duel with Burr. And from what I have read, his intentions were not to kill Burr. But he was honor bound to show up and stand there with a gun in his hand. Burr, on the other hand, had no qualms. He fully intended to shoot Hamilton and kill him, and that's what he did. Shoots him in the chest, he dies. Burr is actually charged with murder. He runs He leaves the country for a while. Remember, he's the vice president. So he comes back. And as long as he doesn't go to New York where the duel was, he's okay. Because they can't arrest him. So he flees. Originally, he flees to Florida, and he returns to Washington. But he's kind of a doomed man at this point. You know, you killed Alexander Hamilton, which a lot of people didn't like Alexander Hamilton, but they didn't want him dead necessarily. You are a murderer. So now he has to come up with a new plan. And his new plan, which is called the Burr Conspiracy, is to try to carve out a personal empire in the West with a general named Wilkinson. They think that they can get what few people have already fled across into the Louisiana Purchase to secede from the country. Of course, his plans come out. 1807, Jefferson orders his arrest. He again tries to flee to Florida, but he's arrested, taken to Richmond, Virginia for trial. And the case goes before Marshall. We'll get through this part and then we'll quit. Marshall again gets to set some precedents. Jefferson is called to the trial. He ignores the subpoena on grounds that would compromise the presidency, using Washington refusing Madison some papers, which we talked about, as his precedent. But that's okay. Marshall contended with that. And Marshall defined, this is when Marshall gets to define treason. So treason in the United States is levying war against the United States or adhering to its enemies. But there's a catch. I mean, that's a pretty easy definition of tyranny, of treason. You know, conspiring against the government, declaring war against the government, those are pretty clear definitions of treason. Where Marshall makes it a little more difficult is he requires 2 witnesses to the same act of treason. Well, they can't find 2 witnesses. So Burr is found not guilty. He skips bail, goes to France, but he's going to come back to the United States in 1812 and practices law in New York until his death in 1836 at age 78. He still is kind of a slime. He'll be divorced just a few months before his death on charges of adultery. He just was not a pleasant person. Okay, we will finish the election and start on the War of 1812 when we come back. Y'all have a good weekend. Do something fun. Stay out of trouble. You can do both at the same time. Yeah. I'm glad to see you coming to class. All right, where did the sign-in sheet didn't even go around? Okay, everybody's here today.
You have a good weekend.
You too.